Welcome back to the Cornelius C podcast. I'm Juan, your host, and today we've got a unique episode for you that we typically wouldn't be doing, right? We're normally bringing you some hot agronomic information that's always timely and it's helping you improve your profits. But this one, we're going to give you some content that you can just sit there and whether you're scouting a field, you're planting, or working in the shop and listen to an awesome story. The story that we're going to bring you is going to be presented with I'm going to be joined today by Russ Strength. And through some of his relationships and connections, we had an opportunity to sit down and interview a former first-round pick of the NFL. So welcome, Russ. How you doing?
Very good. Very good. Thank you.
I appreciate you making some time to make this work. So let's just jump right into it. And I want to get some background, as we talk through, our team's going to put together some footage of this episode of the interview, and we'll splice those in. But then we'll also have linked in the episode the full interview. That way, if you want to, this is, I guess, what I would call the director's cut, right? You get to hear some of the behind the scene things, what led up to it, how is it related to ag, right? And you'll do all that for us. So you've had an opportunity to meet Mark Mullaney, who was the defensive lineman for the Minnesota Vikings, the famed purple people eaters of the 70s, right? So if you know football, you know the purple people eaters.
Absolutely.
How'd you meet Mark? How did this connection come about?
Well, it's actually interesting. I met Ryan Mullaney, one of his brothers, at a football coaching clinic, and got to know Ryan fairly well. And he said, let's go have dinner with my agent and my brother, Mark. And I remember thinking, wow, Mark's going to be there. That's going to be pretty cool. And I remember going to the restaurant, meeting those guys, and Ryan stands up. And of course, he's, going to shake my hand. He's a big guy. And then his brother, Mark, stands up and shakes my hand. And it was like shaking hands with, I don't know, a polar bear, grizzly bear, or something, just massive guy, great guy. And I remember thinking, these guys are not only big, but they were fast. And my first thought was, I can't imagine that guy chasing after me and hitting me because I would never wake up. But I'll never forget Mark just starting to explain the story of how he invented the visor that is now a standard, piece of equipment on football helmets. And I didn't realize at the time that he was actually the guy, he and Dennis Ryan, who was I think he's still the equipment manager currently for the Minnesota Vikings, longtime equipment manager, how they developed it and how that actually came about. I did not know that story. And it just floored me. We'll get into it here a little bit, but then for the people who can watch the full podcast interview, I think it's about 40 minutes. I think you'll find it very interesting.
And it completely is, right? So folks that follow me or that know me know that I love football, especially the NFL, and I'm a big time Bronco fan. And so for me, Broncos in the AFC West, and I remember when this opportunity came up, and I thought, I guess it would be kind of cool to meet an NFL player, and then it was, but a former first round NFL player, right? And then it was a guy that was with the Purple People Eaters, and even though I'm not rooting for the NFC, right? They're the competitors of our divisions. I can appreciate and respect good game, and I knew that this guy came from pedigree that's amazing, and then you start talking about. He's the first guy to wear a visor. And I thought, wait, what? I don't want to age myself here, right? But just when I think of visors and the people wearing them, I think of whether it was Michael Vick or Ray Lewis. Really, Ray Lewis is who came to mind for me. And I didn't realize someone else came to mind until you showed me Mark's picture. But let's get into this with his visor, because I think that's where we have the connection with the story. Was he the first?
It's an odd thing. I drive down the road, I travel a lot, and oftentimes my mind wanders onto different subject matters. And one of the things that we've talked about at Cornelius is what is innovation? And in agriculture, what is innovation? Does it mean that you actually come up with a new chemical or a new trait or something like this? Or is it simply that with all the thousands of biologic companies out there and biostimulants, and then, of course, all the different traits and many genetic suppliers and things, really, innovation oftentimes is about just taking time to be able to independently choose the best of the best from all the different companies and then mix them together and make de facto, if you will, a new product almost, if you will. So I'm driving down the road and I'm thinking to myself, really what Mark had done with his helmet had really been just taking two things that have been out in the public sector for many, many years, a helmet and then a visor, and he put them together and he kind of revolutionized football. Really, it was a revolutionary thing that he did. Yeah,
and he did not there's obviously, visors are for protection, right? And so we'll get into that story here, how that came to be, but you're absolutely right, because innovation isn't really, I mean, it's a lot of things for a lot of people. It could be that ground level creative invention type, right? And just like music, right? Some of the greatest songs, music that we know were inspired by something else, right? And the same thing happened here, right? And so when you brought this to us, we thought, how does this relate to ag? And then you go, I remember the day you're like, it's not about agriculture, it's about us, right? We're innovators. We bring systems approaches. We bring solutions to problems that are real, right? And everybody talks about quality, and everybody talks about American owned and family owned and all those things. And yeah, we're the second oldest, independent seed company in Iowa right now that's still in existence. 90 years is something to toot your horn about, and we can. But we can talk about how we have the best quality out there, and we do. But there's those systems that we put together to identify what people need.
Absolutely. I mean, we take, quite frankly, a package of a lot of Syngenta seed treatments, and oftentimes those seed treatments are put on, Bayer Genetics, if you will, Corn State Genetics, and Corteva Genetics, and others. We use 7 to 9 different genetic suppliers, so we're always looking for different sources, and we mix the best chemistries out there, regardless of where they come from. They could come from your garage, and we would use them if they were the best in the industry. And we do that independently. And that's where some people just say, well, we're independent, and that's great. I think independence only means something if you really have the freedom to choose all the different spectrum of products out there and mix them as you wish. And so I think that's where really we're very unique. And then we'll talk about how Ryan did that, or excuse me, Mark did that. But I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent. So the NFL football draft is coming up here, and you'll see different segments of Mark talking about his background. And one of the funniest parts of the story, in my mind, is in 1973, he's sitting in the student union at, I believe, Colorado State University. And his brother, I believe it was Ed, another one of the brothers. The Mulaney's are all huge. They're all very, very big people. And he comes in and he says, Ed says to his brother, Mark, hey, you've been drafted. And he's like, oh, no, I got drafted? It was 1973. He thought he got drafted for, Vietnam, to go to war. He didn't even know that he had been drafted for the NFL. He goes, no. Ed goes, no. You got drafted in the NFL. The Minnesota Vikings took you in the first round. He's like, oh, well, is that good? He goes, I had to look up where Minnesota was on a map. He goes, I didn't even think about it, And it was just funny because he said at that time, nobody cared about the draft. I mean, I have a friend now who takes off time to go to the draft and watch it or whatever on TV. And back then it was on the 6th page of the sports section. It was just who was drafted and when, and nobody even cared, no fanfare or anything. So
it's just fascinating how all this pieced together. And so let's dive into a little bit about the visor, right? How it was born, right? Because like I talked about earlier, I think about some current guys, but I never knew the origin of it. And what was that like?
Well, it was interesting. I'll never forget him telling me, he's told me the story a couple of times now, so I may not repeat it absolutely 100% correctly. And so that's why I'll challenge everybody to go watch the interview. But long story short, he had taken a finger or a thumb to the eye in a game. And at that time, Mark was actually leading the league in both sacks and tackles, which is a very rare phenomenon. And in fact, the Vikings actually played him as a defensive end, as I understand, maybe even a little bit as defensive tackle, even linebacker at his size, but primarily as a defensive end, and was just being in that position to be a sack leader and tackles leader is just almost unheard of. So anyways, he takes a finger or a thumb to the eye, and he came to the sideline. He couldn't see, and he said, I just felt this immense pressure, and it just was throbbing and hurting. And he said, I looked at the trainer, and he goes, the first time in my life I ever looked at a trainer, and the trainer literally was just befuddled. And
He said he saw
He's like,
fear. He saw fear in the
well,
trainer's
he
eyes,
saw
right?
fear, and he's like, there's blood coming. And Mark wanted to get back in the game. He's like, okay, well, stitch me up, hurry up, stitch me up. Where's the cut? Stitch me up. And he's like, there's no cut, but yet there's blood shooting out of his eye, and didn't know what to do. And lo and behold, that got shown on the Jumbotron, the jumbo screen at the old Metrodome, and a doctor came out of the stands and got a hold of the guards and others and said, hey, I'm telling you, I've got to get down to the field now. I'm an eye specialist, and if he doesn't get to the hospital soon, he's going to lose that eye. And if it wasn't for that moment of that doctor being in the stands, Mark probably would have lost that eye. So they eventually got him to the hospital, and he said it was the most painful thing that he's ever experienced in his life. They put him in a dark room, and it just, he had damaged some things, obviously, in the back of the eye and the retina and different things. And he explains that better in the podcast part, or the interview part. But so I'm going to really abbreviate it. He rehabs, so to speak, but he's definitely going to lose a lot of the vision or perception in that eye. And he wants to go back and play because, again, he's the number one guy in the NFL. I mean, he's going to set records. And so he wants to get back on the playing field. But the problem is, if he gets poked in the other eye and loses that, he could be blind for life. So at first they tried the Eric Dickerson glasses, so to speak. But when you're a defensive lineman, oftentimes you're lined up, you're on all fours or whatever, depends. And all the sweat would drip down. And every play, there was just all this sweat in these goggles. That was one thing. And the other thing, every time he got hit, it would break his nose. So being a running back, to have that type of apparatus, being a little bit different than a defensive lineman, so he's okay, that's not going to work. It's just not going to work. And getting my nose broke all the time isn't fun. So pan forward a little bit, he's driving down the road, kind of depressed because of all the things going on, doesn't know what to do. He's going to lose his livelihood, whatever. And he looks over and he sees this motorcycle helmet. And he's like, well, why can that guy have a visor on that helmet and we can't put a visor on a football helmet? Immediately goes to Dennis Ryan. And within a very short amount of time, they're looking at different types of materials, different plexiglass, different things of this nature. They concoct this clear plastic one, if you will, or whatever, clear shield. And he goes and plays. And in fact, there's a great picture of him tackling Marcus Allen in the backfield. And you can just barely see that clear visor. And he's sacking or not sacking, but he's tackling. He is. Marcus Allen picked up off the ground, he just slams him to the ground. Marcus Allen actually later on talked about that he went and told Ryan Mullaney that was the hardest hit I've ever taken in my life. But anyway, so but the problem was that the sunlight bothered his eye. It just gave him horrible migraines. You got to imagine that the vision's already distorted, but then the light he said, I would just have intense migraines. Well, then they said, oh, hey, you've got to have a shield then that's got a tint to it. Okay, he didn't even think anything of it. But you got to understand, this was, I think, I can't remember, the late 70s, whenever it was, and nobody had ever done this before. So he gets on the field, he's playing the Detroit Lions, and he comes out with this dark visor that nobody had ever seen before. And he's a massive man, 20-inch arms, just a statue of a man. And he goes, the Detroit Lions offensive line looked at him and they were scared. And the one guy goes, oh my, it's Darth Vader. He's come to Earth to kill us, or something like that. And the rest is history. Like the announcers just went nuts. Like, what is this thing? And he just looked so massive and intimidating. And yeah, I mean, he and Dennis Ryan were the ones who innovated it of sorts. They took things that were out already in the public domain, put them together, and made a new thing. And you can't tell me that he wasn't the first that he was the first person to ever have his eye punched. Why didn't other people think about putting a shield on a helmet before then? And they hadn't. And so there again, back to the innovation that we do at Cornelius, where we take things that maybe haven't been put together and do it a little bit differently and approach things a little bit differently. And that's actually quite innovative. So yeah, he also went on to say that everyone thought that Jim McMahon was the first one to have that type of shield, and it wasn't. It was definitely him. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and something that I loved about that interview there towards the end, he jokingly says, "I never made a dime off of it either." So if he was happy to accept royalties or donations to a good cause if people wanted to share. But you know he and I'm excited about that, and I'm glad we're bringing this up because if you love football, especially from an era where, quite frankly, they don't make them like they used to, right? And it isn't just refrigerators or metal out in the farm. The men, right? The men from that time. That's why I tell folks I'm an old soul. But and I know you agree with me. You tell me this all the time, Russell. Thank you. But but one of the when we talked about him and his injury, right? And there was the problem, and there was an innovative solution that was out of the box, right? There was something presented at first, those goggles, that didn't really quite cut it. And you challenge us here. You challenge the sales team. You challenge the product selection team when we're talking about our systems approach, right? And when we're offering folks, everybody knows you have to place the right seed in the right acre, and your salesman and your agronomist can help you do that. But we took that a step further by making sure, you know what? We're going to lose warehouse space by bringing you a custom bulk box. It's an innovative solution. It's going to take us more time, more labor, and more space, right? We're not charging you more for it either. We're just making sure that we bring you something that puts real revenue back in your pocket. And that's how I can see these two stories are connected.
Yeah, and it's interesting when I told Mark about that, he's just sat there and said, "Oh, that makes complete sense." I mean, they actually live on a farmstead that was actually his wife's historically in their family was farmers, and he said, "Oh, that makes complete sense that you're doing these kinds of things." And yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talk about things like accuracy of seed selection for every acre. And so companies will do that. I think that's fantastic. We do it. It's the third thing. The number one thing in raising corn is the weather, rain. Okay. I can't control that. Nitrogen is number two, and that we can moderately control for sure, obviously, but get wet spots in a field, it has its challenges. But then the number three thing is actually wherever you place a variety. And that'll be the third most compelling thing for your yield. And a lot of farmers do not realize that. But along with that then is if you get a 50 unit bulk box and you are finishing up a field and you've got 40 units left in that planter, and now I go to a different field. So maybe I'm going from some heavy clay to light sand or whatever the case may be. Now I have that other hybrid in there that should not be placed in that area. And what happens is the farmer just goes ahead and plants because they're busy or whatever, because it's not dialed in specifically. So this is a perfect example of meeting a need. If you really believe in precision, there's only one way to have precision, and that's to have a customized bulk box, because otherwise you're constantly placing hybrids or selecting hybrids, if you will, in areas they shouldn't be, and you're losing yield every time you do that. So that's why JC and the team here came up with that custom bulk box where you can have 33 units in a box or 47 units, whatever the case may be, to precisely manage the hybrids, and that makes you a lot of money. It makes you a lot of money.
Amen. Right. This is definitely, every year's a good year for that, but we all know this is definitely a year where we're taking it on the chin, but we're going to keep our chin up and chest out, as I always tell my kids. I can go on and on talking about this. Our goal here is give you a teaser, give you some clips as to really an awesome interview to just kick back, sit there and listen. And why I love it and why I had been excited for this is that it isn't just, maybe you're not a Viking fan or even a football fan, right? But just to hear his conversation of working with, you've got the greats like Walter Payton out there, right? And Roger Staubach and Jack Lambert and Cliff Harris and all these other football players and stories that he shared of just that he was able to play through is pretty awesome.
I think you get a kick out of all the stories about Bud Grant and other things too, if you're a Viking fan, but even just being a football fan, and maybe have it on in the background when you're in your shop or something.
Thank you, Russ. Thank you for your time, folks.
Yeah, thank you.
Follow us on socials, and until the next one.
Thank you.